All right. Everybody ready? Let's rock. The House Ethics and Oversight Committee will come to order. Would the clerk please take the attendance?
Chair Burns.
Here.
Representatives Hope.
Here.
Breen.
Present.
Churches.
Present.
Hoskins.
Here.
Wagella.
Here.
Coots.
Here.
Wozniak.
Here.
Harris.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 9 members present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Representative Wagella moves to adopt the meeting minutes from the April 20th, 2023 meeting. There being no objection, the motion will prevail by unanimous consent. Welcome, everyone. At today's meeting, we will begin with a presentation from the director of the Carl Levin Center for Oversight and Democracy at Wayne State University Law School. Following the presentation, members will be able to ask at least one question each. If time allows, of course, members will be able to ask additional questions. We know that session starts immediately after this meeting, so we will do our best to stay on track and stay on time. So at this time, I would like to ask Jim Townsend to please come forward. You can turn on your mic as you come up to the table, and we would invite you to begin your presentation.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here, Madam Chair, Vice Chairs, and members of the committee and staff. I'm Jim Townsend. I'm the director of the Levin Center for Oversight and Democracy. I'm also a former member of the Michigan House, and I served on the Oversight Committee when I was a member until 2016. So what I'm going to do is go through this presentation and try to get through it quickly. First, to tell you about the Levin Center, what we do, and then talk about oversight and what you can do in your role here as members of this oversight committee, and really as members at large. Because part of what we emphasize is that oversight is not just the job of the oversight committee. Every committee, and this is your own rules, say this, every committee has a charge to do oversight. So I'm going to get into that a little bit, but I'll hopefully make this not too tedious to, PowerPoint is kind of a mixed blessing, I realize. I also want to introduce, with me today is Lauren Jasinski. She leads our civic education work, which focuses, it's part of what we do. It focuses on an after-school and in-school program that gives students an opportunity to use a hearing as a way of learning about civics and history and government. So I have to keep these on, I can't see. So what is the Levin Center for Oversight and Democracy? So we are headquartered at Wayne State Law School, as the chair said. We also have an office in Washington, D.C., and the reason for that is that we work both with Congress and with state legislatures and even large cities. And we do some work internationally as well with parliaments overseas. Our mission is to, and I'll get into this a little bit more, but our mission is to elevate the importance of oversight and investigation as a value here in legislatures, in Washington and in state capitals. And I'll talk about why that is so important and how it can be a vehicle for to some degree bridging the partisan divide. Now, I'm not naive about how divided our politics are, but when you're dealing with facts, when you're working across the aisle to get answers, you can build rapport and build respect for each other because you're going to hear each other. If the system is right, if the process is good, and the minority and the majority have an opportunity to really work together to get to the facts and to get to the bottom of questions, then you have an opportunity to hear each other and work together. And that's what Carl Levin did throughout his career. Some of his best friends in the Senate were conservative Republicans. Tom Coburn of Oklahoma was one of his best friends. He served on our advisory board until he passed away, unfortunately. And he and Carl worked hand in glove. They didn't agree on very much. Philosophically, policy-wise, didn't agree on very much, but they very much agreed on the importance of making government keep its promises. And that's really what the Levin Center is advocating for. So, we do this through workshops with Congress and state legislatures, in person as well as virtually. We do a lot of work with national associations that some of you are part of, like Council of State Governments and a whole bunch of other kinds of national groups. We provide videos and testimony, all kinds of webinars, and we do a lot of work that way. We do a lot of scholarship and research. We are at a university because we want to advance the state of knowledge about oversight. How does it fit in the democratic process? Democracy is about a conversation between the people and the government. Well, you are at a very important kind of node of that conversation because you are empowered, and you have the power of subpoena even, to gather information and to seed the conversation with facts, with good analysis. And it's certainly the case that not everybody can agree on all the facts or what facts should be emphasized and not emphasized. That's certainly the case. But if you're really dedicated to facts, you can get a lot done and you can really improve our democracy. So that's enough about sort of that background. We have a thing called the State Oversight Academy, which I'll talk about. These are just a few pictures you can see. We worked in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. We're all in California. We do a lot of work with different states, and then we do a lot of stuff with Congress. So this agenda is, I'm going to talk about what is legislative oversight. I mean, I'm before the Oversight Committee, so maybe it's a little bit presumptuous of me to define oversight in front of people who are in the Oversight Committee, but I'm going to take a crack at that. We're going to talk about our legislative oversight, State Oversight Academy, and our wiki. We have a wiki that actually gives you resources so you can find out what's going on in oversight in all 50 states. So let's say you have a question like, gee, we really would like to learn about how to do oversight of Medicaid. Medicaid's very complicated. I don't have to tell you. Well, you can go to our wiki and our summary, and in a couple clicks, you can find out what Alabama is looking at, what Louisiana is doing in oversight related to Medicaid. We have a video coming out that highlights 4 states. I can't remember all of them. Iowa, Maryland, I think Louisiana, and Ohio. And some of them are doing a really good job doing a bipartisan effort to really understand and troubleshoot Medicaid, because Medicaid, as I don't have to tell you, has been rife with problems. There's been corruption. There's been malfeasance, real problems with Medicaid. I'm not saying that's the case here in Michigan. I'm not an expert on Medicaid, but if you're concerned about that, you are not alone, and you have an opportunity to learn from your peers across the country. I'll talk a little bit about the sort of phases of an investigation as we view them, some best practices, a little bit about crafting an oversight plan. We strongly advocate that as the panel charged with oversight, you should have a plan. You should think about the issues you want to investigate, and then divide it up a bit, maybe figure out a way some folks take on some issues. I know the tradition here has been to work a lot with the Auditor General's office and look at audit reports. I did that when I was in your shoes. I think that's really great, but you can do that and more. It all depends on setting priorities. And then we'll go through a little quick oversight scenario, and then I'll stop talking, and you can ask me questions. So what is legislative oversight? Well, I like to go back to this quote that you see up here. This comes from a Supreme Court opinion that was issued 70 years ago. But it's really a quote from Woodrow Wilson, not when he was president, but when he was a political scientist. He was a really renowned political scientist and studied Congress a lot. So it says, "It is the proper duty of a representative body to look diligently into every affair of government and talk much about what it sees. It is meant to be the eyes and voice and to embody the wisdom and will of its constituents." The eyes and voice of your constituents. That is what you were elected to be. And oversight is the primary way you can be the eyes and voice of your constituents. A lot of folks come to Lansing and think they're there to pass bills. Sure, passing bills is great. Guess what? We have a lot of laws already. How about focusing on whether those laws are working and being the eyes and voice of your constituents, bringing your constituents into this process to help evaluate and hear real-world stories about whether you're really getting your money's worth, right, from the law, whether the law is really achieving the promises that it proposed, when it passed. So eyes and voice is what I'm going to keep going back to. So we have a little graphic here that I think illustrates how oversight works or should work. And so I'll quickly go through this. We call it the cycle of accountability. So you start at the top with a problem. You might read about it in the newspaper or on a website or social media or someplace. It might cause you to then do some oversight. And that could be in this committee, it could be one of your other policy committees, it could be just in your office. You don't have to be in a committee to do oversight. Conduct the oversight. You might issue a report. You might hold a hearing. You generate some findings. The findings might include recommendations that then lead to legislation. If you're lucky, that legislation someday becomes law. Then there's a regulatory process, right? You need administrative rules to implement that legislation. That's the regulatory part. Then you implement, somebody implements, the agencies, the private sector, whoever is, being empowered or directed to solve the problem, right? Then that leads to an outcome. It's time to do oversight again. And that is where often that doesn't happen. So I'll show you what and a friend of mine who's a lobbyist actually for DTE Energy, a guy named Andy Caloris, inspired me to do this because I showed him this and he went up to the wall. I drew it on the wall for him. And he said, no. Yeah, that's the way it should work. This is how it actually works. You recognize a problem and then we go right to legislation. And then maybe we pay attention to the regulations, maybe. And implementation, what? What's that? Everybody goes, we got our nice bill signing ceremony with the governor. We're all done. Let's move on to the next thing. And we tend to, as politicians or recovering politicians, we tend to, think a lot about how well we messaged. We wonder, gosh, we passed those great bills and nobody knows about it. Nobody cares. Well, the reason is they shouldn't care. What they care about are the outcomes that might occur as a result of your legislation. And yet, too often, the focus in this, in Lansing is moving on to the next thing. I realize how busy and how you're all drinking through a fire hose, but it's about setting some priorities. I'm sure when you first came to office, some wise people said to you, pick a few things that you would know about and know those things and really be an expert, even with now you're lucky, most of you, 12 years, you've got 12 years. But whatever the time you do have, that's a good advice. But I would say go further than that. Be an expert about implementation, because most things fail in implementation. And whether you're a conservative Republican or a liberal Democrat, I believe that the vast majority of people here really want to see government work. We may disagree about the size of government and its role, but what we have in government we want to see work. So that's the way it is now. That's the way it ought to be. And we're here to help be a resource to do more of this. So a little bit more about oversight. So oversight comes in several flavors. We tend to sometimes divide it in between sort of what I call cop on the beat. And I didn't come up with this. Scholars have come up with these terms. The cop on the beat oversight is essentially what you might do in the budget process. The appropriations process can be a very good place for oversight because that's where your leverage is at its peak. Those agencies are like, we need money, and your opportunity to put boilerplate language in that directs them to report on their outcomes, and then you can come back later and go, well, what happened here? Did we get the outcomes that you promised? So the budgetary process is very, very important in sort of cop on the beat routine oversight. Overseeing government contracts. A lot of government operates through private contractors. You don't have to argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is a thing. And what we found in studying this issue around the country is that states really struggle to do good oversight with government contracts. And of course, we would say that legislative committees don't have the bandwidth to study every contract, right? But the big ones, the high-risk ones, there are states, even small states. Idaho, for example, does a really good job picking certain high-risk contracts and really paying close attention to them. I'd recommend you do the same thing. It's all about deterrence, right? You're the cop on the beat. You're not going to find every person doing, every crime committed. You're not going to catch them. But if you're there, it deters people from abusing the system. Then the other kind of oversight is, more event-driven, right? There's a scandal, there's a disaster. That's an opportunity to do oversight. There's some chronic problem that finally people just get fed up and want to do something about. And then that can be an opportunity for you to do maybe a more long-term, in-depth investigation. We'll talk about how you can do that. I know that's a sort of an intimidating concept when you think about how few, even though this is a full-time, very professional legislature, compared to other states, believe me, you are in a much better position to do oversight than most. But still, you don't have that much staff. You're very pulled, a lot of different directions. We understand that. But again, if you pick your battles, you can really have an impact on behalf of your constituents. So one way to think about oversight is that you have superpowers. One of those superpowers is the phone that you are carrying in your pocket or in your office. people answer your phone calls, powerful people, people with information. You don't have to subpoena them necessarily. They want your vote on some other issue. They will respond to you. It was the most fun I had as a legislator. I got, people I was fascinated with, people I thought were really important would respond to me because I had a vote, because I was somebody who could press the button. You are in the same position. Use it. A constituent comes to you with a question, and I don't mean a trivial question. I mean something you're seeing from your, in your flow that looks like it's an issue that you need to know more about. Power of the phone call. You can get you can do a full-blown investigation out of your office just by making a lot of phone calls, by pushing people, by working with outside groups that have, a lot of data, that have the ability to do research on your behalf. It's all within your power. So, we'll talk a little bit more about the resources available to you, but I just want to emphasize, you have a superpower. It's called the telephone. It can be huge for you. We tend to talk about oversight and the tools of oversight. We call them avenues of oversight because they're pathways that you can do oversight. So I'm just going to list them off. The analytic bureaucracies, if that's a term that may be a little foreign, but essentially what we mean by that, that's the House Fiscal Agency, that's the Auditor General, to the extent there is an Inspector General in an agency, HHS, for example, any number of agencies. At the state level particularly, we focus on the separation of powers here, but there's nothing wrong with working with those agencies to gather information. It's what you should do. Use them as research assistants for you. Again, you've got the power of the vote. You control their budget. They will respond to you, and you have to do your homework and make sure they aren't co-opting you, and guiding you in the direction they want you to go. But you're all smart enough to figure that out and do that work. The appropriations process is a great place, as I mentioned. The committees, administrative rule reviews, going back to that chart, after the law, there's going to be a rule. And the rule is really what will guide the policy. There are vehicles here at the state level. Obviously, with JCAR, we have, a process for overseeing rules, but you don't have to just rely on JCAR. You can also follow up. Carl Levin was very involved in the rulemaking process throughout his career as a senator. It's as important or more important at the state level. Advice and consent is obviously not an issue here in the House, and I mentioned monitoring contracts. So we did a study of all states, of every state legislature, and we looked at how they do both the capacity they have under their Constitution and their laws to do oversight and how well they use that capacity. And these were the results from Michigan, which are not that great. Now, granted, this is data from it's actually a 2019 report. The results are from 2018 and 2017. So, it's a little dated, but we've since updated this to some degree. But you can see we don't do really better than moderate when it comes to where we stack up. We're definitely not a top 10 state by any means when it comes to oversight. We're really fair to middling at best. And that is disappointing because, again, you are a full-time legislature. You've got professional staff. You have a lot of capacity. And, I really think we should all be thinking about doing better, and it's within your power. So one way to help you do better is we have a thing called a wiki, the SOA wiki, the State Oversight Academy wiki. And I mentioned it before. It's a place where you can go and learn about how other states are doing this work as well as your own state. So we'd encourage you to go see that. This is it. It's a great resource. It's going to even get better, and we're going to issue 2.0 version of this later this year. And again, it's a way to look at every single state and its structures and how it does oversight, and you can ask questions of it, submit more information. If we're wrong about something about Michigan, tell us. That's the beauty of a wiki. Is that the study we've done we know is dated. I didn't feel like we wanted to spend the money to update the whole thing and spend 3 years updating the study. We're going to use our friends across the country to help us update it, and we validate the information about it. So where do investigation topics come from? You can read. There's this, any number of places you can go to find the issues that really deserve investigation. So it's scandals, it's the media. A whistleblower might come to you and say there's something really wrong. It might just be that you have a concern about whether a program is really doing its job. What's that long-standing problem that doesn't seem to get solved? Let's dig in and figure out why. Maybe it needs more money. Maybe there's too much money and they don't know what to do with it. Maybe we've got old standing rules that are getting in the way of implementing the law effectively. With facts, you can bridge a lot of divides. There's a big battle going on right now. I was just talking with the lobbyists this morning for this about what is the proper balance between local control and the need to mine or quarry for the materials you use to build roads and infrastructure. I don't believe, I'm not going to say I'm going to sit here and solve that problem, but there's a fact-based solution to that problem. But you really have to dig in and do oversight and investigate and figure out what are we getting for our money, what are the impacts. As I said, we tend to cut to the chase and not do the oversight and the investigation, and then we get suboptimal solutions where the roads aren't getting built effectively or affordably, and we're still not protecting the environment the way we should, and and communities still are frustrated. There's a better outcome out there for us, and we think oversight is one of the ways to get there. Some topics that we think are very relevant. This is from looking across the country at different states. Pension funds, how they're being operated, concerns about conflicts of interest or just poor performance, an issue. Obviously, many of our constituents care about that. Prison operations, corrections, huge problem in a lot of states. We've had some issues here. Foster care, child welfare issues. We know of some really outstanding work that's been done by different lawmakers around the country. We'd love to connect you with them. Disaster response. We had a huge flood here a few years ago in mid-Michigan. That exposed some major weaknesses in our dam. The way in which we track and analyze the safety of our dams. Much more could be done in that space. Contract mismanagement, infrastructure, et cetera. I'm condensing like what could take 2 days into just a few minutes here, but we will often do workshops with Congress or in states, and we'll talk about sort of the phases of an investigation, how to do the fact finding up front. We very much encourage doing a written product, even internally, so you're all coming to agreement over what the facts are, as best you can. Now, you're not going to agree on everything, but before you blow it out to the public, write something for yourselves that it could be a one-pager, but it doesn't have to be a 100-page report. We want that analysis and that investigation to happen before the hearing. A lot of times people get this backwards. They go, oh, we don't know something. We're going to have a hearing. Well, the hearing is theater. The hearing is the place where you put things on the record. You find out what you believe is true from your, it's a little like I don't want to equate it with a trial, but it's a little bit like that in the sense that the attorneys in a trial setting will be conducting depositions to gather information. They'll be conducting discovery, all of which is behind the scenes before the trial occurs. Well, you should be doing the same thing in an investigation. Do the upfront investigation, write up a small, or keep notes, communicate with each other so you're on the same page, and then get into the hearing. And you will do a much better job, and you won't have the sort of, I think it's fair to say we've had some hearings in this town that have not maybe reflected terribly favorably on the legislature. Let's not do that again, and that's the way to do that is to do your homework ahead of time. And then follow up. There's lots that can be done after you've issued your report. You can issue a formal report, too, publicly after. Usually that's done after the hearings have concluded. And that's a place, and the goal should be, we're going to issue a report. We're going to start this investigation and issue a report that every member of this committee can sign their name to. That was the standard that Carl Levin set with his Republican counterparts, and they did with him. And over several decades, they built relationships that allowed them to get to those facts and stay on course, even though maybe the solution, they didn't agree on every solution. South Carolina, I just want to give you an example of a state, very different from Michigan in many ways, and a state that doesn't have a full-time legislature, although they're in, more than a lot of states. They have an excellent House Oversight Committee. It has, very robust subcommittees. It maintains a video archive, publishes detailed minutes of all of its meetings. really special thing about them, though, is they really engage the public. They create on their website a portal where I talked about planning. They go out and they publish in advance the issues they're going to study in the course of the term, 2-year term. And then they put out there a solicitation, essentially, not only to the agencies they're going to study, to the staff that work for those agencies to come in and give input about what is happening, but they also ask the public, engage the public to come and give comment at a website that facilitates that sort of public intervention. We call that people-centered oversight. Oversight should be about people, and the more you can get the public involved, giving an unvarnished, account of whether government's working or not, the better. South Carolina really does a good job of this. They also publish an account of what happened afterwards. So they'll say, we're going to study these 4 agencies in the next year or two, and then they maintain a table that shows what happened. Was a bill passed in response, was there some sort of response to the problems that were uncovered? Was a new law passed? Were regulations changed? What happened as a result of the oversight? So there's a certain amount of, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander, or whatever the term is, right? You're saying everybody should be open and accountable and subject to oversight. Well, the members of that committee are doing a bit of walking the talk, I guess is what they're doing, by being transparent about their own outcomes, what happened as a result of their own investigations. So we think that's a great behavior to model, and South Carolina does a pretty good job. There's a couple of other states that do that pretty well. I got ahead of myself, but yeah. I mean, the point is they report to citizens what happened as a result of their deliberations. So our recommendations, we really were excited when a couple of senators last term, Ed McBroom and Jeff Irwin, proposed there be a joint, constitutionally established joint oversight committee that would have robust subpoena power and a lot, maybe more resources, and would really put a focus on oversight. So we think that's a really good approach. We obviously emphasize that when you're doing an investigation, you really allow the minority and the minority is given a real role in this, and an ability to have a good faith participation and call witnesses and be able to input to the investigation, because that's where you get your best investigation. It's like the science. Think about it, the scientific method is a value around discovery, right, and diversity. And the more you get people coming from different viewpoints, the better product that you get in the end. And that is definitely what I saw as a congressional staffer when I used to do oversight work many years ago. That is certainly what my colleagues, who are some of the nation's leading oversight experts with decades of experience doing work with Carl Levin on this, the more they engage the other side of the aisle, the better the investigation, because you had people questioning other people's assumptions. If you just operate an echo chamber and do an investigation, you're not going to get a very good, it'll be okay, but you're not going to really get at the issues if you don't have people in the room who are challenging your worldview and coming at it from a different angle. We definitely encourage, and what we would recommend you all do is really hold yourselves accountable for doing more follow-up after you have your hearings. I think sometimes there are some hearings that are held, they get a lot of attention, and then sort of nothing after that. The hearing is really the middle of the process. A lot can happen afterwards, and we encourage that. You could improve contract oversight here by getting members of the legislature involved with the state administration board, state administrative board that oversees contracting. This is a change this is legislation you could pass to make this change and get the legislature more engaged. It would give you an official seat at the table. You couldn't study every contract, but again, the big ones, the high-risk ones, it's something you should consider. It's a best practice that other states have adopted. And then, probably most importantly is create an oversight plan for your committee. And if you can pull it off, encourage your whole, say the whole House, or maybe the caucus. I mean, we much prefer that you work across the aisle on oversight. but we understand that that isn't always possible. So one way or the other, do a plan, talk about the issues that you really think are worth investigating, and then execute the plan. And then post the status and the results of these investigations. The public has a right to know what you found and what happened afterward. Sort of publish your plan, publish your findings, and follow up. I don't want to talk for too long, but this is sort of what oversight planning, the levels at which you could do oversight planning. The entire legislature, if you had a joint committee, you could do it obviously within the House and Senate. You could do it in every committee. So all of you serve on multiple committees. I would encourage you to think that way. This is sort of what an oversight plan would look like. Start with the topic that you're interested in. Keep on the factual question. A lot of time, again, back to that chart where you jump straight to the legislation. We do all these workshops with lawmakers around the country, and you have to sort of stop them and go, no, don't talk about the solution too much. Let's make sure we have talked about the things we don't know and focused on where we're going to find the resources and the time we're going to spend to uncover the things we don't know. Then, fine, recommendations and solutions certainly belong in the mix, but keep it to, as best you can, 80% of your time should be focused on sort of learning and uncovering what you don't understand and know. Those avenues I talked about, and then it would depend, was it sort of a routine kind of oversight, or is it more event-driven? So that's a template that we use in our trainings, where we ask people we break them into groups and we have them go through an exercise where they take an issue and then really do an oversight plan on it. This is just one example that we might do in a training with you all. So, there were, all of us saw the news a few months ago about this really disturbing report that showed that there were psychotropic drugs being given to children in foster care in inappropriate ways. I'll just say it that way. So that is the kind of thing, there's a scandal, or at least there's a potential scandal, something that really does require, digging in and getting into it. And you have the capacity to learn more and do something substantive on this. That's all I wanted to convey. Do you see the name Ben Ike? He directs our state training program. He's in Pittsburgh today at a conference, so he asked his boss to come in, and so I do what Ben says, and I came, and so he's the best contact. But of course, any of you who wants to call me up, I'll give you my cell number, or email me or anything. I'm happy to answer any questions and would love to work with you all.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. We really appreciate your time and your energy, and clearly your passion around oversight. So thank you so much. I'd like to open it up to members if we have questions. Okay. Representative Wozniak, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for your testimony. It's very clarifying as to what our role should be. But your time in the Michigan legislature, I've always appreciated our Auditor General and their reports, because they just report facts.
Right.
They don't make determinations, but where that gets lost is the bias of the legislature and how they interpret those facts. So do you, with your experience in the process, do you see a better way for the Auditor General reports to get to, say, an oversight committee? Because I don't see half the reports that come through from the Auditor General, and I think it should almost be mandatory that they come here and talk about it.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think the Auditor General is required to share with the committee all of its reports. Now, whether those reports make it to your individual offices, I don't know. But that is a thing that I would recommend you follow up on. Contact the legislative liaison for the Auditor General's office and make sure that it's getting into each of your inboxes. The key thing is to then take a look at those reports. They tend to be pretty short. They're not 100 pages long usually, and you can see them and they distinguish the material concerns, the things that are really material, meaning that they are relevant and they have consequences that are material that matter. My practice was always to focus on those rather than chase the things that don't necessarily matter as much. So that's a great place to start. The thing is, though, you can do more with the Auditor General. You can ask the Auditor General to conduct studies on your behalf. And they don't have unlimited resources, but they have a lot of very talented people. And so, this may already be underway, but that issue that we just touched on with regard to prescribing medicines that are really powerful and psychotropic for children, that it would be very interesting to have somebody with analytical abilities tackle that and get into it and find out how often that's happening and what does the data say about that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does somewhat, and I think we can improve on that whole process coming forward. But I agree with it. Unfortunately, most of the reports I've seen from the Auditor General are not very complimentary of a lot of the departments in the state, and it shows that corrections should be made. And many times I think that goes unnoticed.
Right. Well, I'm sorry, I'm an incredible nerd. I'll just go back to this. That it's a symptom of that process breaking down, and the red line and the blue line as opposed to the arrows. That we're not following kind of that the left half of that. We tend to get really our attention span falters basically on the left side of that graphic, and that's when it's most important. And that's what the Auditor General is helping share information with you about.
Wonderful. Thank you, Representative. Representative Breen, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Representative. Welcome back.
Counselor, I understand you are a Wayne State law grad.
That is correct. They built the new building my first year of law school, and in the process, they shut down the library during finals week for the first years, and
that must have been brutal because the first year of law school is brutal.
It
and
is.
Not being able to
It
have
is.
a place
I
to
had
study
no
for
place
finals.
to study, so it was not fun.
Wow.
Thank you so much for a lot of this. I mean, I know that we get emails from the Auditor General, and it tells us what projects are going on, what's coming up, and in fact, it's almost like over information. We have to seek out what we want. It comes to us. We just don't always even have the time to look for it.
Right.
And we need to be better about that. And we had a school safety task force brought forth last year, and in the process, that was in the wake of the Oxford shooting, we found that another commission that had developed in the wake of the Parkland shooting had issued a bunch of recommendations that were never followed up on. We do have to do better. I'm hoping that this presentation will either be emailed to us or it will be a copy of that in the minutes. But two other things. One, I really appreciate your comment about the hearings, because the first thing I think they teach you in law school is never ask a question you don't already have the answer to,
Right.
at least in a hearing setting.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you might find yourself on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's the most extreme example, and I don't want to dwell on that, because that was a really dark day. I think everybody, well, most everybody agrees that was a dark day.
and
Yeah.
looking at the wiki, I found that there were 18 topics sampled from 27 states, including D.C., about 100 reports. Only one of them was from Michigan. And I'm wondering, was that just because there was only one report of interest, or it was just a sample, or there was not a lot of anything specific to Michigan there?
Yeah. We are still, the wiki is a work in progress, and so we are still building and drawing information from all states. So we introduced the wiki in March, so this is really new, and so we want to keep building it. So the feedback like that is exactly what we're looking for. So I'll take that back to Kyle Gettard, is the person who built the wiki and maintains the wiki. She's not here today, but I'll let her know, like, hey, there's only, Michigan only seems to have one report on that. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I'll ask her about why that is. There's more information about Michigan on our website where you can find an analysis of how well Michigan's oversight function actually performs, but the information isn't that updated. So the answer is we're working to update all this stuff through the wiki, and you've helped me today, pointing out that we need more information about Michigan.
I mean, we can find the information, we just have to seek it, and that's part of the issue. So thank you for that, appreciate it.
Thank you, Rep. Breen. Madam Vice Chair?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I laughed when my colleague here made reference to Saturday Night Live, but of course it's not funny, it's absurd. And it did make us all look bad, in my opinion. Michigan just changed its term limits by citizen-initiated measure. Before that, we had 6 years. Has any study been done or any information sought regarding the quality of oversight relative to the length of time you can serve? Carl Levin was in the Senate for
36
a
years.
really long
Yeah.
time.
Right.
And we don't have that luxury here. We don't get to stick around all that long. Even 12 years isn't
It's not
a
very
really long time. So I just wondered if there was any relationship between the quality of oversight and term limits.
There absolutely is. There's not been a rigorous, statistical study that I'm aware of. The research director of our State Oversight Academy is a professor at Wayne State in political science named Marjorie Sarbaugh-Thompson, and she is an expert on term limits, and she's written a book about term limits. She's written about the relationship between term limits and oversight, but what I can tell you is it's a little more anecdotal, but I'll just say this. The study that was done that Sarbaugh-Thompson and some of her colleagues performed for us of how oversight is being done across the country, rated states, and it wasn't a detailed scale, but essentially there was a set of states that were in the top 10. None of them had short term limits or even term limits at all. A few of them had very long term limits. Term limits, it's much more complicated, as you know, than just whether you have them or not. I mean, Nevada has term limits, but they're like 24 years. Colorado has 12-year term limits, but they're not life. You can come back. So what we find is the states that don't have term limits tend to do much better on the oversight measures that we have, and they use the assets they have much more thoroughly and efficiently. The other thing I'd say is that we have a little bit of an experiment underway in California, which used to have the same term limit regime that we had. They had the 6-year and 8-year House, Senate, and in 2012, the same thing happened there. The voters approved an extension of term limits. It's exactly the same extension that we have, 12 years in each house, lifetime limit, 12 years in each house. What we have been told, and we work with California, we've done trainings in California. What we've been told by their leaders is that after 2012, they observed an increase in activity around oversight. And that's in a one-party state. I mean, obviously, California is a state dominated by Democrats. So you've got Democrats investigating, and again, I always hasten to say, it is the case that there's less oversight activity when you have one-party rule, but that does not have to be the case, shouldn't be the case. But, I'm not naive. We know politics. But the way to really approach that, I think, if you're in the majority and and the governor is of the same party as you, is to not personalize it to the governor. And I know that's easier said than done, but really, holding the HHS feet to the fire about an important issue, or the Transportation Department, about something that's clearly not working, that is not about the governor personally. That is about you being the eyes and voice of your constituents. And so to answer your question, yeah, it matters a lot, and California is a good example of a state that's just done what we did, now 10 years ago, and they've seen an uptick in their oversight activity. But I would, if I were, in charge ever, which I never will be, I would, get rid of term limits altogether because we have them. They're called elections.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. All right. Other questions? I have a few, but want to open it up to other members. Yep. Rep. Wagalla, please go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation today. As we were sitting here, I just read SJRO from 2022, and I think it's a great idea. I'm assuming, obviously, that did not move, which I think begs this kind of complex question here is, how do you convince people in power to give power up? How do we make sure moving forward that we are putting the citizens of Michigan first? And I think like giving oversight teeth and actual power is an important thing. And maybe you could argue we would be giving ourselves power, but how do we get that across the finish line? That from your perspective, how do we convince our colleagues? Because I think a lot of us here are interested in ethics and oversight, so we might be supportive, but I think getting that to actually go on the ballot is a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, I think it's, well, I agree with what you said, which is that that resolution, and I'm not saying it's perfect, is empowering to the legislature. The reason South Carolina does a really thorough job, at least in its House, is that South Carolina is a very strong legislative state. That's one-party rule, of course. They don't shy away from holding their agencies' feet to the fire, partly maybe because it's a very conservative state, and so you've got a lot of people who are skeptical about a lot of the agencies by nature. But it isn't just that. It's that the legislature, the legislative branch, they have a lot of unity and a lot of belief that the first branch of government, by the way, the first branch in the Constitution, right, is the legislative branch. So you are the primary, leaders of government, really, even though so much attention is focused on the governor. So it's a way to empower you. How to get it across the finish line? To me, both political parties have a political interest in the oversight question. If I were the Democrat, I'll give some unsolicited political advice to the Democrats. Look, you've got a very narrow majority in both houses. What you should be doing is showing the public that you're on their side, because it's those voters in the middle. They're voting on basically who they think is really fighting for them and isn't part of the system that's just permanent government, Lansing, whatever. I think that applies to the Republicans too, though, that the opportunity, both of you politically, is to align yourselves with the public and showing them that you're really fighting for them. And oversight, if it's done well, is a way to do that. Now, there's a lot of ways to do oversight poorly, a lot of ways to be grandstanding and gotcha politics and that sort of stuff. And I'm not, we're not going to eliminate that from our political discourse. But what we're trying to do here is elevate what is done well. And one thing I think that is not recognized enough is that every day bipartisan, fact-based oversight takes place in Congress. It just doesn't get covered by the media like it should, because there's no fight, there's no blood on the floor, there's that kind of thing. But I think it could be, I'm all for getting greater focus on not kumbaya, everybody holding hands and all that's nonsense. Nobody believes in that, and nobody practices that really on things that matter. But elevating the notion that you can't have a democracy without a fact-based discourse. That we have to be observing certain norms in order to have a functioning democracy. That is something everybody should be fighting for. And oversight, modeling that kind of behavior, is a way to empower yourselves, to help your political prospects, but also to just help our democracy. I hope I answered your question somewhat.
Good. Okay, thank you, Representative. Any other questions from members of the committee? Okay, I just have a couple questions for you, as it looks like we're wrapping up. So I know earlier on in the presentation, the term advice and consent was used. I think you said that didn't necessarily apply to the House, but just for reference for members, can you talk to us about what that means?
Yeah, so what I was referring to there was the process of the Senate providing advice and consent with respect to the governor's appointments for certain positions.
Okay.
That's not a role the House has, so I gloss over that a little bit because that's not really relevant for all of you, except when, someday you guys run for the Senate.
Thank you. That's helpful. And one last question. I know when you were discussing South Carolina and their practices, you mentioned involvement of residents in the process, which I think is fantastic. Can you talk to us about best practices? How do they or other legislatures that do that go about even letting members of the public know what's happening effectively and then really bringing them into the fold? What does that look like when the rubber meets the road?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what South Carolina has done traditionally is to publish a plan for the agencies and issues it's going to conduct oversight on in the coming term. They promote that through all of their channels to the public. They also promote it, as I mentioned, to the agencies that are going to be investigated. So they solicit good, honest feedback, hopefully honest feedback from the agencies and the staff. Whistleblowers, to the extent there are whistleblowers, can be encouraged to come forward. I mean, it's an opportunity to do that. I think the way to execute that well in here or anywhere else would be not only to have the committee be a sounding board for that or a trumpet for that, but each of your offices. I mean, you all have enormous reach in your own communities. So you can echo that message, hey, the Oversight Committee, or this could be the Education Committee, or it could be the Criminal Justice Committee. Any committee can do this. It's not just the Oversight Committee, but you can get the message out that we've made a plan for oversight. It's going to include these 4 areas over the course of the next 2 years. You got to pick your battles, and you can't do oversight on 8 things all at once. It's just impossible. So you pick your battles, you figure out what's really important, and then you publicize that to your constituents. You have an opportunity to be involved with the legislature between elections. Don't people get tired? They always say I remember when I was knocking doors, I only see you every 2 years,
Yep.
right? Well, here's your chance, and I know you all do coffee hours and public town halls and stuff, but at your town halls, at your coffee hours, imagine if you had with you a list of the oversight, that plan of oversight, and you could let your constituents know, hey, we're going to focus on these 3 issues. If you're interested in that stuff, if that's affecting your daily life, come tell us your lived experience with government on that issue. It's a great way to engage people. The other thing I would say, a best practice that we're studying right now, we're going to now launch a study to look at all 50 states and how they use technology. Michigan's a huge state. It's the biggest state east of the Mississippi, right, I think? It is really burdensome on people, even if you're not that far away, to come to Lansing and attend a hearing and pull a card or otherwise get in front of the microphone here. Some states have started, because of COVID, had started to build a capacity for people to do remote participation. Now that has to be managed properly. Obviously, it can become a kind of a nightmare, I suppose, if it's not managed properly. But there are ways in which you can encourage people. Again, when you've shown them that there's an opportunity to really talk about and get them involved with oversight, that you can hear from voices that never get in this room. And they're ultimately the people that matter most. They have the most at stake when it comes to your work. So, so that would be how I would, try to execute that kind of plan.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Are there any questions from members before we wrap up? Okay, all right, we'll see no questions. Mr. Townsend, Representative Townsend, thank you again for being here with us today, and we will definitely be in touch with you as we move forward around creating an oversight plan and implementing some of the best practices that you've referenced today. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, let me just say thank you to all of you. It really, does my heart good, to see a group of members who really are paying attention to this issue. You've got enormous power, and I feel good that there's some folks here who really want to use that power because it can make a difference for your constituents.
Awesome. Thank you again so much. We really appreciate your time. Thank you. Look forward to working with you. All right. Well, there being no further business before the committee today, the committee will stand adjourned.